I've sent some notes on macroeconomics, and I will also send notes on the demand, supply, and equilibrium. We're still on the demand. Together, team. Priska, I've received the notes on macro. Perfect. So we can start on where we end stop. That is on the point. To call it the point. Call it price. Elasticity of what we call of the demand. So I'm sending past paper questions, assignment particularly for the first paper. So being told that given the demand function, this is a question given what's called the demand function. So given what we call the demand function, so we have the demand function being Q is equals to 150 minus P. Q is equals to 150 minus P is equals to 150 minus P. Q is equals to 150 minus P. That is equivalent to 150 minus P. So then you're being told that calculate point price elasticity. Calculate what we call the point price elasticity. Calculate the point price elasticity. Point price elasticity when P is equals to 30. We say when P is equivalent to 30. When P is equivalent to 30. Together. And the second is to basically we do what? Interpret what you call your result. Interpret what you call your results. Interpret what you call your results. Tuko sawa team? Nipatie yes kama tuko pamoja. Nipatie yes kama tuko pamoja. Give mwalimu yes if you're together. So what is the formula for the point price elasticity? Point elasticity of demand. We say negative change in Q over change in P times P over Q. These are the points. Points to what we call original. Points to what we call original values. So these are the points to what we call the original values. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. So number one, I want us to get if P is equal to, I want us to get Q. So just come here and say Q is equal to 150. Where there's P, you replace with. Where there's P, you replace with. Where there's P, you replace with what? P, you're going to replace with. This was 3P, sorry. Minus 3P. So where there's P, you're going to replace with what? With 30. So we have minus 3 times 30. So Q is going to be 150 minus 90. What is the value of Q? What is the value of Q? What is the value of Q? So the value of Q is basically 60. So the value of Q is 60. So then how do I get change in Q over change in P? How do I get this? For those who are doing QA, we understand that change in Q over change in P will basically do what? We differentiate. We differentiate what we call the demand function. We basically differentiate what's called the demand function. What is my demand function? That is Q is going to be 150 minus 3P. Tuko pamoja. 150 minus 3P. 150 minus 3P. Tuko pamoja. 150 minus 3P. How do I differentiate in relation to P? How do I differentiate? Basically in relation to P. So the one that has no coefficient of p, we can't differentiate. So negative 3p, this is p raised to 1. So we're going to say 1 times, this is negative 3, 1 times that. Then we have p raised to 1 minus 1. Together, p raised to 1 minus 1. So we have negative 3, p raised to 0. The laws of indices. Any number raised to 0 is equivalent to, from the laws of indices. Somebody, Aoni, Charles. Charles, I want your attention here. So the demand function is Q is equals to 150 minus 3p. Charles, tuko sawa hapo? Are you able to see that? So we do what? We differentiate. To get change in Q, we differentiate what we call the demand function. We differentiate what's called the demand functions. Differentiate what's called the demand function. Haionekani aje? Are you experiencing the same thing? Priska, are you seeing the board? Some people are saying they're not seeing the board. Kindly assist me. Some people's net could be wrong because I don't think so. I had adjusted this room. There shouldn't be an issue to do with the net. Priska, tafadhali naomba you let me know. Are you seeing the board properly? Priska, are you seeing the board properly? Kitawi, are you able to see the board properly? I'm seeing Gillian and Charles saying that they're not seeing the board. Please, for the sake of time, you respond. Are you able to see the board? Yes. So there's something wrong with the net. This room was basically worked on Charles. You cannot have issues to do with the net. So Charles, number one, look up. Q is equals to 150 minus 3p. So find what's called point price elasticity when the price is 30. Yes, when the price is 30. So Charles, I come here, I get the value of Q when P is 30. What do? Where there is P upper, I replace it with 30. So Charles, I'm saying 150 minus 3 times 30 because P is equivalent to that 30. I get Q to be 60. That should be 150 minus 90. I get Q to be 60. So on that point, we have P is equals to 30, and then I have Q is equals to 60. So my one chance. So then when level comes to this part, I want to get the change. We don't have change in Q over change in P. What do? I differentiate what we call the demand function. Charles, nataka ubonyeze yes. Gillian, tuko sawa? Gillian, tuko sawa? Gillian and Charles, you are holding me. Gillian and Charles, you are holding me. Please respond. You're the guys keeping me from moving. Yes, thank you. So then how do I differentiate? The coefficient is P. We cannot differentiate 150 because it does not have coefficient of P. How would you get? So I have negative 3P, negative 3P. How do I differentiate? This is P raised to 1. So I'll say 1 times negative 3, then P raised to 1, you're going to minus 1, minus 1. So 1 times negative 3, I'm having negative 3, P raised to 0. Then I ask a very simple question that you did in high school. A number raised to 0. If P raised to 0, what is P raised to 0? Any number raised to 0 according to the laws of indices. Any number raised to 0. We say 1,000 raised to 0, P raised to 0. The laws of indices, any number raised to 0 is equivalent to 1? To 1. So how do you get? I understand that change in Q over change in P is equals to negative 3, negative 3. Tafadhali munipatie yes kama tuko pamoja. Tafadhali munipatie yes kama tuko pamoja. is 1, yes. So this is P raised to 1. So negative 3 times 1. So the change in Q over change in P is negative 3, negative 3. I come back to my formula. Point price elasticity of demand is equals to negative change in Q, negative 1 over change in P times P over Q. So remember, these are points. These are points. And the points we were able to get, I have P is equals to 30. I have Q is equals to 60. So I'll come, because I already have change in Q over change to P. So negative 1 times negative 3 times, what is P? P is 30 over 60. So negative 1 times 3, that's 3. That will be 3 times 30 over 60. This cancels to this. So I'm having 9 over 6. I can simplify this 3. This goes there too. So point price elasticity of demand is equals to 1.5, or what we call 1.5. So point price elasticity is equals to 1.5. So when I get to 1.5, 1.5 is greater than 1. So we call it elastic. This is elastic since we say it is greater than 1. Since it is greater than 1. Tafadhali tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. So I want to give you an assignment. Given assignment, we say given what I call the demand function. Given what's called the demand function. Given the demand function. Given what's called the demand function. Given the demand function. So we say that Q is equals to 200 minus 3P minus what's called 3P plus 80 over P squared over P squared. Say determine. So determine what? Point elasticity of demand. Point elasticity of what I call demand when P is equals to 10. The number 2, we say interpret what I call your results. So this is your assignment. As you go for break, you do for me that. Are you able to see your assignment? Are you able to see your assignment? So as you go for break, that I would want you to do that for me. Tubonyeze yes tafadhali. We respond with this. So I want to go to importance of elasticity of demand. So you go to importance of what we call elasticity of demand. So this note should be there, don't worry. Importance, we call it importance of what we call elasticity of what we call demand. Importance of what we call elasticity of demand in economic decision. In what we call in economic decision. Importance of elasticity of demand in economic decisions. So importance of what we call economic decision, importance of elasticity of demand in economic decision. So one of which we call it government policy. I just explained, which I'm not going to write much. Government policy. So number 1, decision, it basically assists in government policy. Are we together? So basically in government policy, we are talking about getting what's called the desired. We say the desired revenue. Getting what's called the desired revenue. Are we together? So the government quest basically to get what's called the desired revenue will tax those commodities which have inelastic. So in order to get the desired revenue or more revenue, tax more the government should tax more. We say commodities. Commodities, we understand with inelastic demand. Inelastic demand together. And therefore, we understand that tax less, and we understand commodities with what we call with elastic demand. To Kosawa with elastic demand. That is the first one. So the government requests basically to make revenue. They should tax more commodities with what we call with inelastic demand and tax less those commodities with elastic demand. Are we together? So basically to imply commodities with elastic demand, the government should do what? Provide subsidies. Those commodities with inelastic demand, the government should provide, this one government, provide what we call subsidies. Subsidies. To Melona. And again, back to the explanation. We know that for elastic demand, a small change in price affects the quantity demanded. So those ones, you don't increase the price altogether. Are we together? Or you tax more those commodities with inelastic demand together. So then we say the second, we call it setting. We call it setting what we call the prices. The prices by what we call by the producers. Setting what we call the prices by the producers. Setting what we call the prices. Setting what we call the prices. Setting what we call the prices by entrepreneurs. By the entrepreneurs. By what we call the entrepreneurs. So setting prices by the entrepreneurs. So the other one is basically setting prices by the entrepreneurs. Setting what we call the prices by the entrepreneurs. So that is basically to say that those commodities within elastic demand, commodities with what's called within elastic demand, we understand that should be charged what we call high prices. So the commodities with inelastic demand, this commodity basically should be charged high prices. Low prices with elastic. Elastic should be charged what we call low prices in terms of setting the price. So if you're setting the price, then you need to charge highly those commodities with inelastic demand together. Then you have what we call price discrimination. We call it the price discrimination by what's called by monopolist. Price discrimination by the person that we call monopolist. So under market structure, we'll be able to talk about monopolist. But you're basically saying that a monopolist is where we have one seller selling a unique product altogether. Selling what we call a unique product. That is a monopolist. There's a concept that we talk about price discrimination. Price discrimination. Price discrimination. So price discrimination. So whenever we talk about price discrimination, this is basically what we call the act of selling the same product for different prices. Selling same product. Selling what we call the same product for what we call for different prices. So it is an act of selling what we call the same product, and you're saying that for the same product, we sell it at what we call at different prices. So the act of selling a product, the act of selling what we call the same product for different prices. The act of selling the same product, it is saying for different prices. The poor, maybe you're charging less. Those in the middle class, you charge them the middle. And those at the niche, you charge them high price altogether. So how do you do this? You should be able to divide the market into sub-market altogether. You should be able to divide markets into sub-market. So for these markets, if I come up with two things, you'll have a market with inelastic demand, and then you have a market with what's called elastic demand. Elastic demand. Example of a market with inelastic demand. Which kind of a market is this? Inelastic demand. This is like the rich. Are we together? Let's say that is like Rhonda. We say Lavington, Rhonda, Lavington, Karen. Those are markets with inelastic demand. Remember, these people do not care about a product, but they care about what's called experience. So under this market, which is called inelastic demand, we're definitely going to charge what's called IPRA. We are going to charge what's called IPRA price. And for elastic demand, like the slums, we know that slums people are price sensitive. You're going to charge what's called the low prices. You are going to charge the low prices. Tuko pamoja. Bonyeza yes kama tuko pamoja. Bonyeza yes kama tuko pamoja. Bonyeza yes kama tuko pamoja. So then next we discuss about 5. Shifting. We call it shifting of what we call of the tax burden. Shifting of what we call the tax burden. Shifting of tax burden. The next we have what we call shifting of what we call the tax burden. Shifting of tax burden. It depends on what's called degree. Say the degree of what we call elasticity. Shifting of tax burden definitely depends on what's called the degree of elasticity. When you talk about the shifting of tax burden, it basically depends on the degree of elasticity. So when you look at the degrees of elasticity, are we together? We can have 2 points altogether. We have inelastic, and then we have what's called elastic. So we have inelastic, and then we have what you call elastic. So we have inelastic, and then we have what you call elastic. So we have what you call inelastic, and then we have what you call elastic. So we say that for inelastic, are we together? Are we together? Inelastic. Inelastic. Are we together? Inelastic. First of all, I explain inelastic. Large part of the indirectors can be shifted. Large part of indirectors can be shifted to what you call to consumer. Say by basically, say by increasing what you call the price. By increasing the price. But the large part of the tax can basically be shifted to the consumer by basically increasing the price. Then we have what we call elastic. We have what we call elastic. We have what we call the elastic. We have what we call the elastic. So whenever we talk about elastic market, are we together? Demand in elastic, the burden of tax will be more on the producer. You cannot shift. So the burden of tax, we say, will be more on the producer. Burden of tax will be more on the producer. So the burden of tax in this case will definitely be more on the producer. The burden of what I call the tax will definitely be more on the producer. The burden of tax will definitely be more on the producer. So the burden of tax will be more than the last one. So 5, the rest you get in the notes. Number 5, we can talk about what we call, number 5, we can basically talk about what we call wage bargaining by trade union. What we call wage bargaining, we call it the wage bargaining, we say by the trade union. wage bargaining by the trade union. So wage bargaining by what you call the trade union. What you call the wage bargaining by the trade union. What you call the wage bargaining by the trade union. So when you talk about wage bargaining, labor with elastic demand always command higher wages. Labor we assign with what you call inelastic demand. We understand always. We understand commands which call a higher wage than the labor, than what you call the labor with what you call with elastic, the labor with elastic demand. That the labor that we understand is with elastic demand. Together, that the labor with elastic demands. Together. Tafadhali. We respond to this. So then we proceed to importance of cross elasticity of demand. Importance now. Importance of what we call cross elasticity of demand. And say in economic decision making. Importance of what we call the cross elasticity of demand in economic decision making. Importance of what we call cross elasticity in economic decision making. So when you talk about cross elasticity, and we did examples on cross elasticity, what is the importance of cross elasticity in economic decision making? So we basically have 3 points in terms of importance of what we call the cross elasticity in economic decision making. Tuko pamoja. So there are basically 3 things that cross elasticity of demand assess in economic decision making. 1, enables a firm to make changes in price depending on the price of competing firm. Make changes. Say make what we call changes in price, and you say depending on what you call on the price of what you call of competing, depending on the price of competing firm. So cross elasticity, we say that the change in the measure of responsiveness in the change of quantity demanded of commodity A in relation to the price of B. So cross elasticity related to make changes in price depending on the price of the competing firm. Remember, when you talk about cross elasticity, we were relating what we call, we had 2 products, the substitute products and the complementary products. So number 1, making changes in price depending on the price of the competing firm. Tumeelewana. So the second, in terms of cross elasticity, we understand in case of cross elasticity, we understand that in case of cross elasticity, a firm's product is elastic in case of what we call cross elasticity. In case of what we call the cross elasticity, of a firm's cross elasticities of a firm's product, we say is elastic. In case it is elastic, the firm is able to lower the price. The firm is able to lower what we call the price. Firm is definitely able to lower the price. The firm is definitely able to lower the price and increase the price for cross elasticity and increase what we call the price when we say the cross elasticity, we say is inelastic. When the cross elasticity is inelastic. When the cross elasticity is inelastic. Together. That is the second importance of cross elasticity in economic decision making. But the last importance of cross elasticity in economic decision making, we have a third scenario when the government is basically imposing what we call tariffs. Are we together? When the government, we say, is basically imposing what we call tariffs on imported goods, when the government is basically imposing tariffs on what we call imported goods, when the government basically is imposing tariff on what we call the imported goods, tariffs are only likely to be successful. So in case the government is basically imposing tariffs on imported goods, and the danger of imposing tariffs on imported goods, what is the danger, Prescott? What is the danger of imposing, or what is a good thing? Why do we impose tariffs on imported? And especially scenario where we impose high tariff, so that we can consume locally produced goods altogether. In some scenarios where we're imposing high tariff, we are basically encouraging the citizens to consume what we call the local products together. We are basically encouraging the citizens to consume what we call the local products together. That's why we impose higher tariff, to make it expensive to import. When you're making it expensive to import, we basically want people to consume the locally produced goods. So I'm saying when a government is imposing tariff, we're saying the tariffs are only likely to be successful in restricting what we call import, if what we call tariffs are likely to be successful imposing tariff is only likely to be successful. We say to be successful is only likely to be successful when they're only likely to be successful when we say when the local product in the foreign market, when the cross elasticity of what we call of the local product, or the cross elasticity of the local product, and foreign substitute is high. And foreign, we say substitute, we say is high. And foreign substitute is high. Tumeelewana? Tubonyeze yes. Kama tumeelewana. Kama tumeelewana, tubonyeze yes. Asante. So the last part on demand. Factors influencing elasticity of demand. I talk about 5. You'll have them in the notes. About 5, then the rest you get in the notes. Factors. We call it factors. A very common question. Factors. We say influencing. Say elasticity. Elasticity of what we call demand. So what we call determinants. Call it the determinants. So call it the determinants, factors influencing elasticity of demand. So determinants we say of what we call of elasticity of demand. Determinants of what we call elasticity of demand. So what we call determinants of elasticity of demand. So what we call determinants of elasticity of demand. So factors basically influencing what we call elasticity of demand. So what we call determinants of elasticity of demand. So number 1, we call it time. Number 1, we have time. Tuko sawa, Gillian. Number 1, we have time. Are we together? So in terms of time, we have short run, and then we have long run. We have the short run, and then we have what's called the long run, I'm going to talk about the short run and the long run. But in simple words, short run is within a short period of time. Long run is after a long period of time. So in the short run, we basically understand that the demand is inelastic. It is inelastic. However, when you talk about in the long run, demand we basically understand is elastic. But in the short run, demand is basically inelastic. Then in the long run, it is what we call elastic. So number two factor, we call it possibility of substitution. Call it the possibility of what we call of substitution. Possibility of what we call possibility of substitution. Tuko pamoja. On possibility, you'll have the notes. Have you gotten the notes on macro? Priska, are the notes on macro in the group? Are those notes there on macro? Mwanze kusoma, macro. Are those notes there? The notes on macro, Priska. Confirm if those notes are there. Yes, perfect. So possibility of substitution. So we're basically saying that the closer the substitute of a commodity, the more likely the demand to be elastic. So we basically understand the closer, we say the closer the substitute of what we call of a commodity, the closer the substitute of commodity, we say the more likely the demand to be, we say, inelastic. The more likely the demand to be inelastic. So the closer the substitute of a commodity, the more likely the demand to be inelastic. The more likely the demand for it to be inelastic. Then we have what's called degree of necessity. We call it the degree of what we call of necessity. Degree of what we call necessity. We call it the degree of necessity. We call it the degree of necessity. Degree of what we call necessity. The degree of what we call necessity. The degree of necessity. The degree of necessity. Are we together? So necessity, what is the necessity? When you say necessity, degree of necessity. When you talk about degree of necessity, necessity is something that you cannot do without it together. So basically, when you have a necessity, if the degree of necessity is high, the demand becomes inelastic because you cannot do with it. So the greater the degree, the greater, we say the degree of what we call of necessity, the more likely the demand to be inelastic. If a product becomes a necessity, can you do without it? Can you do without it? If a product basically becomes, if a product basically becomes a necessity. So the greater the degree, the greater the degree of necessity, the more likely the product to be inelastic. So we're saying that whether, are we together? Whether a product price increases, it doesn't change altogether. You'll still buy it altogether. Then you have the size of what we call consumers' income. The next factor is what we call the size of what we call of the consumers. The size of what we call of the consumers' income. What we call the size of what we call the consumers' income. What we call the size of what we call the consumers' income. Are we together? So if a person is poor, how do you behave when a person is poor? They're definitely sensitive to the price. Sensitive to the price. Are we in agreement? The poorer a person is, the more sensitive they become to price. So a small change in price, they can easily turn away from the product. Are we together? If a person is basically poor, they become more sensitive to what we call to the price. However, if a person is extremely rich, they're not basically sensitive together. So we say that poor people have what we call elastic demand. However, the rich have what we call inelastic demand. However, the rich have what we call inelastic demand. However, the rich have what we call inelastic demand. So poor people have elastic demand. They're very sensitive to price altogether. However, the rich have what we call inelastic demand. They're more about experience, but not money together. So if a person is poor, just to put it in brief, poor, we understand that demand. They basically have what's called elastic demand, meaning they're very sensitive to the price. Together, they're basically more sensitive to the price altogether. They are highly, this is highly affected. They're basically highly affected by what you call increase, or what you call the decrease, by increase or the decrease of price. So these gentlemen are highly affected by when price shoots and go low. That is the poor. That's why when you go to a slum and you sell jerrycans of oil, will people buy it? Kitari, Priska. When I go to a slum and they sell oil in terms of 20 liters, nobody is going to buy it because they're very sensitive to price. That basically implies that the price is going to shoot. I work as a smart economist in class, since I understand that the poor people in the slum definitely have what you call an elastic demand, what will I do? I'll package this oil into 5 bob, 10 bob, and so they will be able to buy. But in research, we're basically saying that when you talk about poor people, they have what you call elastic demand, implying they're sensitive to increase or decrease to price altogether. But on the other side, we understand that the rich have what you call inelastic demand. And that's why the rich is most likely they're more about experience rather than price. Then the last factor that affects elasticity of demand, we call it habit. We call it the habit. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. So whenever I talk about habit, and this to be precise, I want to talk about habit forming goods. I want to talk about habit forming goods. I want to precisely talk about what you call the habit forming goods. I want to talk about what you call the habit forming goods. So examples of an habit forming goods. What are these? Habit forming goods. We have alcohol. Are we together? Do these people care whenever a beer shoots even to 200 or 300 shillings? Do they care, Priska? For those who are highly tied to alcohol, they don't care. So basically, you understand that habit forming goods, they have what's called inelastic demand. They're not sensitive to price. Together, Gillian. Perfect. Then I can talk about maybe 1, 2 more. Nature of the commodity. We call it nature. Nature of what we call of commodity. And I'm basically talking about what's called durability. What is a durable product? When I say durable product, what is a durable product? So durable products are products that can last for long altogether. So when you talk about durable products, you only buy them once altogether. You'll only buy them once, maybe in a year or in 5 years, like furniture. So you need to understand that durable goods have what? In terms of elasticity, have what? Durable goods have? Durable goods have inelastic demand. In inelastic demand, since they are only bought once. Since you only buy them once, since they're only bought once, they have inelastic demand. Why? Since they are only bought once. They have what's called inelastic demand, since they're only bought once. Since they are only bought once. Why? Since they're only bought once. So then we can talk about the next factor. We talk about inflation. The rest you get inflation. So that is point 7. So we say that inflation is the persistent rise in the prices of commodities, periods where prices of commodity keeps on increasing. So in such a period, demand tends to be inelastic altogether. So in terms of inflation, during inflation, demand tends to be inelastic. Demand, we understand tend, we say to be, we say inelastic. It says since there is persistent, there is what's called persistent increase in price. So during inflation, because there's continuous increase in price, demand will always tend to be inelastic together. The rest you can get from the notes. So that is done with the demand. Are we together? That is done with the demand. But just something interesting. Relationship between elasticity of demand and total revenue. Relationship between what we call elasticity of of demand and what we call in the total revenue. And what we call the total revenue. So what is the relationship between elasticity of demand and what we call the total revenue? What is the relationship between elasticity of demand and total revenue? So we need to understand that total revenue, because total revenue is definitely high when the demand is inelastic. So total revenue in most cases will always be high when the demand we say is inelastic. Total revenue will be high when the demand is inelastic. When the demand is inelastic, when the demand we say is inelastic, and low when the demand is elastic, and low when the demand we say is elastic, and low when the demand is elastic, and low when the demand is elastic to Bonyeze, yes. So in terms of what is the relationship between elasticity of demand? Remember, whenever we have inelastic demand, we can always increase the price. So total revenue, we understand, is always high when demand is inelastic and low when the demand is elastic. So tumemaliza na demand. Tubonyeze yes, kama tumeelewana. So I want to start on supply. I want to start on what we call supply. I want to start on what we call supply. I want to start on what we call the supply. I want to start on supply. So we start on what's called supply analysis. Supply analysis. Tuko pamoja. Perfect. Supply analysis. So the first thing to define, first thing that we're going to define is definition of supply. Definition of what we call supply. definition of what we call supply. The first is what we call definition of what we call the supply. The first is basically define what we call the supply. So whenever we talk about supply, the concept is more or less the same as demand, but supply relates to what we call the producers or the sellers altogether. Supply relates to the producers and the sellers, and it's the opposite of demand. So whenever we talk about supply, it refers to the amount of commodity. It refers to the amount of the commodity that a producer or a seller is willing and able to sell at a given price over a given period of time. Refers to the amount of the commodity. We say it refers to what we call to the amount of what we call of a commodity that a producer, we say is willing and able to sell at a given price over a given period of time, over what we call a given period of time. So whenever we talk about supply, I'm talking about a producer or a seller. And you say that is the amount of a commodity that a producer or a seller is willing to sell at a given price over a given period of time. At a given price over a given period of time. So I was saying something very interesting that supply and demand, they just interchange. So number one, supply relates to the producer or the seller, demand relates to the consumer. And I was basically saying in terms of demand is usually high when the price is low. On the other side, when I'm talking about supply, when is supply very high in terms of price? When is supply? When are producers willing to supply more? If you want to tap on the sellers or the producers to supply, what do you do to them? When prices are very high, increase the prices and you get producers supplying commodity. Then I proceed to the next thing, we call it supply schedule. We'll talk about supply schedule. The next, we talk about what we call supply schedule. We'll talk about what we call supply schedule. Supply schedule. So supply schedule, like the demand schedule, we say is relationship, shows what we call the relationship. It basically shows the relationship between price, between what we call price and the corresponding quantity supplied. It basically shows the relationship between price and what's called the corresponding quantity supplied. It shows the relationship between price and corresponding quantity supplied. And that basically implies that this is a functional, we call it a functional relationship between what's called the price, between the price and what's called the quantity supply, between the price and what's called the quantity supply, between the price and what's called the quantity supply. It's a functional relationship between the price and what's called the quantity supplied of what we call of a commodity. The functional relationship between price and what we call the quantity supplied of a commodity. With an illustration, I have one side price, and this is the shillings. Then I have on this other end quantity supplied. I want us to see what happens. Price on one end and quantity supplied on the other end. And you see what happens. So this is basically in shillings. This is definitely in units. So if I have 5, I have 10, I have 15, I have 20, I have 25, I have 30, then finally I have 35 here. So we have this. So we have this. And so we have this. So we have 40, we have 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. What can you observe on that supply sheet? What can you observe too on that supply sheet? What can you observe on the supply sheet too? What can you observe from that supply sheet? What can you observe from the supply sheet? Lazima munipatie hiyo. What can you observe from the supply sheet? What can you observe from what you call the supply sheet? What can you observe from the supply sheet? Tafadhali. We contribute. What can you observe from the supply sheet? Please come, my good representative. What can you observe from the supply sheet? What can you basically observe from the supply sheet? What can you observe? Yes, what are you observing in this thing when you look at this? You're just observing S. My good friend, you're only observing S. Unaona nini in terms of price and quantity supply? Tafadhali musiniangushe. Gillian, usiniangushe. Kitawe, usiniangushe. I will not agree. Mtu aniangushe hapa. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supply. The higher the price, we can see that the higher the quantity supplied. We can see that the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. So if I was to put this in form of a graph, I will form what we call a supply curve. I would definitely form what we call a supply curve. I will form what we call a supply curve. This is how it will look like. We don't have a graph, but this is how it will look at. This is how it will look at. So if I have P1, P2, and then I'll have Q1, and then Q2. When the price is low, quantity supplied is low. However, when price increases, quantity supplied is also increasing. Quantity supplied is also increasing. So I want us to see something. We need to denote that NB and understand that from what I call from the supply schedule, that you have, from the supply schedule, and what we call the supply curve, from what we call the supply schedule and the supply curve. A number of things can be observed. From the supply schedule and supply curve, a number of things can be observed. Quantity supplied is low at low price. One is quantity supplied, we say is low, we say at low price. Quantity supplied is low at low price. Quantity supplied is low at low price. Number two, quantity supplied, we say is high, and we understand at high price. Quantity supplied is high at high price. That's the next thing that we can observe, that the quantity supplied is high at high price. But look at the supply curve. The supply curve is basically sloping upwards. The supply curve is sloping upwards from left to the right. So say the supply curve slope upwards. Supply curve, you can see. Supply curve slopes upwards, and say from the left to what you call to the right. So the supply curve slopes upward. It is saying from left to the right. The supply curve slopes upward from left to the right. So the supply curve, this is to basically mean a supply curve is what you call is upward. upward sloping. We can basically tell that this is upward sloping. The supply curve is definitely what they call upward sloping together. So then we'll proceed to the law of supply. Law of supply. Is there anybody who needs a break? Kuna mtu anahitaji break kama tuendelee. Law of supply. So law of supply. Is there anybody who needs a break? Ama tuendelee. Tafadhali tusi. Is there anybody who needs a break? Dawe. Priska. Is there anybody? Okay. So how many minutes break? How many minutes break? How many minutes break? So come back by 25. Yes, by 25, it should be okay. So then I proceed to what's called the law of supply. We together, Charles. I hope you've done the assignment that I've given you. Submit that assignment. So the law of supply. So what does the law of supply basically state? The law of supply states that when this price is low, the quantity supplied is going to be low, and when the price is high, the quantity supplied is going to be high. Other factors, L constant or ceteris paribus. So the law of supply, the law of supply, the law of supply states that when the price is low, the quantity supplied will be low, and you say, and vice versa. And vice versa. Vice versa means now when the price is high, the quantity supplied is going to be high, and vice versa, ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus. Meaning other factors held constant. That is what we mean by ceteris paribus. Other factors held constant. So we have been able to see what I'm saying when you're talking about the supply schedule and the supply curve. The supply is high when the price is high, and supply is low when the price is low. But you're saying in those scenarios, the price, other factors are basically held constant. Other factors are basically held constant. We respond with a yes. So then we proceed to what we call reasons why. Reasons why we say supply curve slopes upwards. Reasons why supply curve we say slope upwards. That is say i.e. we say positively sloped. I.e. we say positively. Reasons why supply curve we say slope upwards. I.e. positively sloped. Reasons why the supply curve slopes upward, i.e. positively sloped. I.e. we say positively sloped. So one of the first reasons, there is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. The first reason is that there is what we call, there is a direct relationship between what's called price and what we call the quantity supplied. So there is what we call a direct relationship between price and what we call quantity supplied. So when the price increases, the quantity supplied will also be increasing. The second reason, say, as a result of increase in profit, as a result as a result of an increase in profit. So when profits increase, as a result of an increase in profit, producers are willing to supply more. Producers are willing to supply more. Are willing to supply more. As a result of an increase in profit, we understand that producers are willing to supply more. But lastly, we understand that less competitive farms. So when you talk about less competitive farms, we're saying that less competitive farms are able to remain in the market, are able to remain in what's called in the market, when we say the prices are high. So when you look at the less competitive farm, they're only able to remain in the market when the prices are high. And that explains why the supply curve is upward sloping, or what you call positively slopes. Together, team. As we proceed to what you call factors influencing, we call it factors influencing the supply, or we call it the determinants. Of what we call supply. Factors influencing the supply, so what we call the determinants of supply. What are these factors that basically influence supply, determinants of supply? One of it, we call it price. So one of the factors is price. How does price influence supply? So basically understand that other factors are the factors we understand that held constant when other factors are basically held constant, when other factors are held constant. At low price, we understand that at low price, the quantity supplied, we say is low, and vice versa. The quantity supplied is basically low, and vice versa. That other factors are constant at low price, the quantity supplied is low, and vice versa together. The other factor that affects supply, the second, we call it time. The second is basically time. And whenever we talk about time, we have what's called the short run, during a short period of time, short run, and then we have what's called a long run. So we have the short run and the long run. What happens during the short run? When you talk about the short run, quantity supplied is low. So we know that quantity supplied, we know is low, and that basically means inelastic. Then in the long run, quantity supplied is high, and we understand that this is elastic. Quantity supplied is high, and we understand that that is what we call elastic. Quantity supplied is high, and that is definitely what we call elastic. That is definitely what we call elastic together. And that is what we definitely call elastic together. And that is what we definitely call elastic. So proceed to the next factor, we call it technology. As a factor that influences supply, we call it technology. The next factor that influences supply. So the next factor, we call it technology. And this is what we say about technology. When we have a higher technology or a better technology, what does it do to supply? When you have a what you call a better technology, what does it do to supply? When you have a high or what you call better technology, what does it do to the supply? When you have a high, what you call better technology, what does it do to supply? What does it do? higher technology, the higher the quantity supply. So we understand that the higher the technology, the higher what's called the technology. Technology, we say that the higher the supply, and vice versa. We basically understand that that implies that obsolete technology we understand leads to what we call lower supply. Obsolete technology leads to lower supply. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. So when I talk about next, we call it environmental factors. Next is environmental factor. We call it environmental factors, i.e. climate. Environmental factors, i.e. we have the climate. So we have what we call environmental factors, i.e. the climate. Environmental factors, i.e. the climate. So how does climate basically influence? How does the climate basically influence what we call supply? So we need to understand that when you talk about how does climate basically influence supply, how does climate basically influence supply? How does climate basically influence supply? So we know that quantity supplied is high when climate is favorable. Quantity supplied is high. We understand that when what I call the climate we say is favorable. When climate is favorable, you say, and vice versa. So vice versa basically means that when the climate is unfavorable, quantity supplied is low. Together team, quantity supplied is low. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. Then we have what we call the cost of production. Number 5, we call it cost of production. Number 5, we call it the cost of production. So I want to ask this to my representative. When the cost of production is high, what is the supply? When the cost of producing a commodity is high, supply is low. And when the cost of production is low, supply is very high. So higher cost of production, lower quantity, higher cost of what we call a production, higher cost of production, the lower, we understand the lower, say quantity supplied. The lower the quantity supplied, and say, and vice versa. The lower the quantity supplied, and vice versa. So the higher the cost of production, we understand that the lower the quantity supplied, and vice versa. So then we can also talk about what we call government policy. What we call the government. We call it the government policy. We'll talk about what we call government policy. So we have the last one as what we call government policy. We have what we call the government policy. So how does government policy basically influence supply? So basically have a government policy that is favorable, which you can have. So government basically encourage production by reducing. Encourage, we understand encourage, what we call production, and you understand this is done by reducing what's called the taxes. But the government basically encourages production by reducing what's called the taxes. The government encourages production by reducing what we call the taxes. And if they increase the taxes, they discourage production. We can also talk about transport and communication as the others you get in the notes. Transport and what we call and communication. What we call transport and communication. So with better roads, with what we call better roads, it leads to, with better load, it leads to higher quantity supply. Better roads, we say better roads, comma, the higher, we say the quantity supplied. And say it in the vice versa. And vice versa. So poor roads, lower the quantity supplied. Tubonyeza yes, come on. Tubonyeza yes. So we are starting on what we call individual supply and market supply. Individual supply and what we call and the market supply. Individual supply and what we call the market supply. Individual supply and what we call the market supply. So we start with the first one, call it individual. We call it individual supply. We call it individual supply. We call it individual supply. So individual supply talks about a single producer. So we say refers to the amount of commodity, refers to what they call to the amount of what they call of a commodity that we say that an individual amount of a commodity that an individual producer is willing, producer say is willing and able to sell, say at what they call at a given price over a given period of time. At a given price over a given period of time. So it basically refers to the amount of a commodity that an individual producer is willing and able to sell at a given price over a given period of time. So whenever we talk about individual supply, so basically it refers to the amount of a commodity that an individual producer is willing and able to sell at a given price over what's called over a given period of time. So then we discuss about what's called the market supply. We discuss then 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 what's called the market supply. So when you talk about the market supply, this now involves variety of what they call the producer. So we basically call it the aggregate of individual producer supply, call it the aggregate of what we call of individual producers, the aggregate of individual producers supply in what's called in a relevant market. So we say the aggregate. If you have 10 producers, so the aggregate, how much they're willing to supply in a market, in a relevant market in a given time, at a given price over a given period of time. So I can maybe just SM as market supply. There should be producer 1, seller 2, seller 3, up to depending on the type of a market. So this is what represents the market supply. So this is individual. These are individual. These are individual. We call them individual supply. Tuko pamoja. These are individual supply. Together. So this represents individual producers supply. Producers supply. And this is the market. We call it the market supply. That is the market supply. Together. Tuko pamoja. Tuko pamoja. Tubonyeze yes. Diagrammatically, I can have the market supply. Look up. This is SM. So this is P, this is quantity. So this should be equals to. So you can just have, sorry, we start with S1, say plus, now we have S2, this is P, this is quantity. Then we have plus. Some people, when you're asking an exam, you don't remember. If you remember the diagram, that should give you, that should also be okay. You just say up to the SN. So this would give me, this should be equals to what we call the SM. So this is quantity. This is quantity. This is P. So that if you're asked and you don't remember this, you can use this and you'll still get that in economics. We'll still get that in economics. We can still use this and we can still get that. Tunaelewa economics. Are we enjoying and are we understanding economics? Are we enjoying and are we understanding economics? Are we enjoying and are we understanding economics? I hope we understand it. I hope we understand it. Tunaelewana. Kindly kama tunaelewana, tubonyeze yes. So in the next class, I will talk about movement along the supply curve, so changes in quantity supply. So I'll start the next class, movement, we'll call it along the supply curve, curves to what we call changes in what's called in the quantity supplied. Changes in what we call in the quantity supplied. So movement along the supply curve is to what we call changes in the quantity supplied. So that is where we definitely start. That is where we start. That is where we start in our next class. Any question? Any question? Any concern raised? Any question? Kitawe, any question, Gillian? Any question, my good representative, Priska? So there seems to be no question. So I want us just to say that God bless you and God bless our class. We meet in our next session. That is on Saturday. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kitawa. Thank you, Preska. God bless you. Tujikaze hii semester. This semester is a bit short. Preska, I hope you're aware this semester tujikaze. So unaona mwalimu anajikaza. Kila mtu nataka jikaze. Together. Nataka kila mtu ajikaze. The semester is a bit short. Tujikaze, tafadhali. Make sure that we read. we'll make sure that we revise, we'll make sure that we attend class, and we will be able to make it. Thank you so much.